Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Analyzing the Story with your favorite host, me, Nadia Rivero. This week, we travel to the past by checking out our favorite childhood books, such as Peter Pan, The Jungle Book, and The Little Prince. We've talked about magic, family, imagination, love, friendship, but we're missing a touch of madness. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we're gonna be analyzing Lewis Carroll's most famous book, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and the reason and meaning behind the story. To be honest, you guys, I'm really excited to talk about this story, because it happens to be my favorite Disney movie and childhood book. I mean, the scenes can be a little bit crazy, like the tea party or the caterpillar scene, but they're great. I do believe that the animated film has great animations and is pretty loyal to the book. And don't get me started with the characters. They're so much fun. I think my favorite one would be the Mad Hatter. Okay, sorry, I got a little bit carried away. Now, before we jump into analyzing the story, I'll tell you a little bit about the author. Let me start by saying that Lewis Carroll is a pseudonym. Yeah. His real name was Charles Ludwig Dodgson. He was born on January 27, 1832. And actually, that's my birthday too. So it was kind of a shocker when I found out. Anyway, he grew up in Daresbury, Cheshire, England. Yes, you heard right. Cheshire as in the Cheshire Cat. And he died on January 14, 1898 in Guildford, England. Carroll was an incredibly brilliant man. He was an English logician, mathematician, photographer, and novelist. His most famous works, like I mentioned before, are Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and its sequel, Through the Looking Glass. He grew up in a small town with both of his parents and with other 10 siblings. Therefore, it was really difficult to get bored. I mean, come on, must be super fun to grow up with a lot of brothers and sisters. Plus, Carroll had always been really good at creating new games to amuse his siblings and inventing stories, which he kept doing when he got older. He began writing when he was 12 years old in a magazine called The Rectory Magazines, in which he wrote little manuscripts, and later on he wrote and published his other works. Another thing that I would like to point out is the time in which Lewis grew up, which was the Victorian age, right? So just to give you guys some context of what was happening at the time and for you to be able to kind of understand better the mindset and some other topics that I would be addressing later on in this podcast. So the Victorian age was mainly marked by the reign of Queen Victoria from 1837 to 1901, a time of great political reforms, social changes, and economical growth. Some of the most important creations at the time were the telephone, telegraph, steam technology, and engineering achievements, such as ships, railways, and locomotives, which led to an important impact for society and, of course, economy, due to all of the goods that could be exported easier and faster to other countries, and even to other continents. The Industrial Revolution. Also, rural life was affected thanks to the rapid growth of cities. There were scientific discoveries, for example, important information about diseases such as cholera, malaria, and tuberculosis. So now that you have a little bit of background, I'll get started with what you came in today for, analyzing Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which was written in 1865, and fun fact, it's considered Britain's most successful children's book, even more than Harry Potter. Can you believe that? So, for those who are not familiar with the story, I'll tell you what it is about. So, it all starts with a girl, Alice, sitting by a river with her sister, who was reading a book. Then Alice started getting tired and sleepy, and in that moment, a white rabbit appeared, saying that he was late getting somewhere. And he proceeded to enter a rabbit hole. Alice, out of curiosity, starts following him, and she ends up falling through the hole too. She entered a small passage that led her to a room with lots of locked doors in it. Then she noticed that there was a key in a table that was in the middle of the room, but the key was too small and didn't fit in any of the doors. A moment later, she realized that there was another little door behind some curtains, and this one opened with that key. But of course, she couldn't get through the door because she was too big for it. Then, on the table appeared a little bottle which said, "Drink me." She drank it, and she shrank. So now she was able to get out of the door, but she had forgotten the key on the table. So she couldn't get out yet. Then a little piece of cake appeared, which had the words, "Eat me." Alice ate it and grew taller. So she was so big that her head touched the ceiling. So now she had the key, but couldn't enter the door. She started getting desperate and started crying. Then a moment passed, and she shrank again and managed to get out. Throughout the story, Alice meets a lot of crazy characters. First, she met a lot of animals that were talking about English history and politics. Then a caterpillar that made her question herself who she was. The Cheshire Cat that tells her that everyone in Wonderland is mad, even herself. The Mad Hatter and the March Hare, who were always drinking tea. For them, it was always tea time. Actually, their clock didn't show the time but the days, because for them it was always 6 o'clock. The Queen of Hearts that would cut the heads of people who she didn't like. So it's kind of a crazy and absurd world, and it confuses Alice. You might be wondering now where this story came from. What inspired Carroll to write what seems to be such a weird story? Some of us might just see it as a kid's story, to entertain children, but there must be something behind the scenes written in this book. I don't know about you guys, but this is a topic that I was so curious about because we see other Victorian writers and the majority of their stories have to do with personal experiences or the environment they were living in. And it's so much obvious to the readers because they create real-life situations with their characters within the stories. But with Carroll, it is not that obvious. Some anonymous authors had said that it could have been influenced by Carroll's crazy mind, that he might have had a medical condition because of some of the scenes in where Alice says that sometimes she splits herself into persons. Maybe this was a sign of schizophrenia. This has not been confirmed, but it seemed to me a curious hypothesis. Professor Robert Douglas Fairhurst talks about the same thing, but in another perspective. He says that in the book, it's given certain importance to doubles or twins, like Tweedledee and Tweedledum, or the fact that Alice says that sometimes she splits herself into persons. This could be because Carroll thought of himself as two persons too. He had two personalities. He was Lewis Carroll, the author, the person who had an incredibly big imagination that was able to explore new worlds and create stories. And there was Charles Dodgson, which was a logician and mathematician, a serious, shy, and neat man. Others say that the story could be portraying the idea of kids maturing away from home in what seems to be a world ruled by chaos and nonsense. Alice, growing and shrinking into different sizes, could reflect the ups and downs of adolescence with young people, sometimes feeling adult and sometimes younger, like if they don't fit in any of these categories. They're too young to do certain things, but too old to do other things. It's confusing. Or that people can be seen in different ways by different people, depending on a situation or context. Alice is seen throughout the story as different things. She gets confused as a flower, a serpent, a maid. This confuses her even more in her journey of finding out who is she. Another thing that seems to me really true is that the scene of the caterpillar could be a criticism to society and the culture of the adults are smarter and better than kids or teenagers. We see that the caterpillar talks to Alice in an arrogant way. Everything that comes out of Alice's mouth is incorrect according to him. He can't understand the kids' responses and takes them for granted, like some adults do in real life. The famous sentences that adults say, "I'm older so I'm smarter," or "You can't teach me anything because I have more experience than you." Literary scholars have identified the existential themes of identity in Lewis Carroll's Alice Adventures in Wonderland, but the question, who in the world am I, applied much more broadly to Victorian childhood overall. According to Lydia Murdoch, the first lines of Carroll's story identify Alice as a particular class of child, one who, unlike most mid-Victorian children, spent her days studying. The book was published just 5 years before the 1870 Education Act introduced a national system of elementary schools for all children. Throughout the book, Alice seeks to find meaning to the new world she is in, and after questioning her own identity, she tries to recall the knowledge that she had over certain subjects, starting first with the multiplication tables and then moving on to geography. Despite this, Alice never loses sight of her social orientation. In fact, she proudly tells the Mock Turtle that she attends a day school with French and music lessons, and when he asks if she also studies washing, she indignantly replies, "Certainly not." The story also shows earlier debates from the 1830s and 1840s over child workers in British factories and mines. The Mines and Collieries Act of 1842 prohibited all children under 10 from working underground. John Tenniel made an illustration of an oversized Alice sitting in the underground corridor full of her tears that would likely have evoked the confinement, isolation, and danger of mining children. Carroll also touches on the theme of play and having fun, which distinguishes children from adults, and that in Victorian times, children were not allowed to be children because they were put to work. The author, Isaac Watts, talked about how bad it was for children to be curious and disobedient because it made them lazy. Carroll did not agree with this at all, and in his book, instead of condemning childish curiosity, he delights in the imaginary worlds of fantasy and game that they could create to distract themselves and play, like normal kids should. After reviewing different authors and their opinions and studies about Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, we can conclude that the book marks the change in Victorian ideals of childhood from work, discipline, and essential sinfulness to education, play, and innocence. However, like all childhood ideals, Alice's Adventures reveals as much about adults than it does about children, the situations that Carroll didn't like about his time and how he would have liked them to be. Lydia Murdoch also affirms that Victorian readers deeply appreciated how Carroll's masterpiece was a work for all ages, combining childish simplicity with adult humor. In a review, The Times concluded, "We certainly enjoyed Alice's walk in Wonderland, though every once in a while, perhaps, something haunting nearly woke us from our slumber. At its core, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland remains a book that inevitably explores childhood from an adult perspective." I don't know about you guys, but I'm speechless. Honestly, I'm so satisfied with the research and the things that we discovered today. All of my questions were answered, and I hope that this episode left you feeling the same way it did to me. Thank you so much for joining me this time in analyzing the story. You know the drill. Leave a comment of which book you would like me to analyze next, and I'll see you next time. Bye!